So let's go ahead and get into it. I wanted to start with this quick conversation about the actual terminology. So the word neurodiverse or neurodivergent, it actually comes from a couple different areas. I want to clarify that this is not the new term that we give to students with autism, and I'll say autism to keep it short, but really the term is autism spectrum disorder. The term Asperger's is not really used anymore. We mostly consider folks who are on the autism spectrum as being autism spectrum disorder. So I will probably just say autism. But this is not, we haven't replaced the word autism with neurodivergent. That's not how this works, really. What neurodiverse is, what that means is it's a term to describe people who have the cognitive wiring, the wiring within our brains, if you will, which of course is not actually wiring, but the cognitive, the neural connections, I guess you could say. Students that have, or people that have a certain kind of wiring or neural connection that might cause them to have some barriers in learning environments. And notice that I've said some learning environments, depending on how you've laid your course out, how you've organized things, your course in your class may actually be beneficial or more beneficial for students that are neurodivergent. It just depends on kind of what you've thought about, what you've been proactive in planning for. So I wanted to clarify those two things really quickly. So students, when we talk about neurodiverse students, we're comparing this idea of neurodiverse or neurodivergent to what we would say are neurotypical. And I don't love that terminology. There's a lot of reasons why, but the main reason is that every single brain is unique. There are no two brains that are alike. So really, we're all neurodiverse if you think about it that way. But when we want to think about how can we make sure that we're accommodating and meeting the needs of these students in our classroom that have autism, ADHD, OCD, all these different things, it's helpful to give a name to it so that we kind of know what we're talking about. So when we're talking about students who are neurodiverse, we're really thinking about students with that fall into one of these categories. Perhaps they have a specific learning disability of some kind. They may have something like ADHD, autism, even Tourette's syndrome, mental ill health. So students that maybe have some issues that are mental health related. And then also this can include neurological illnesses and even brain injuries. So let's break each of those down a little bit. So when we're talking about learning disabilities, we're talking about things that can possibly impair or compromise educational skills. And so that would be things like dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyspraxia, those kinds of things fall under that learning disabilities category. What we would call behavioral conditions, that would be things like ADHD, autism, Tourette's syndrome. And when we're thinking about mental ill health, these are things like OCD, depression, anxiety, trauma. And so this category can really be something that could shift over time. A student could have maybe they have some excessive anxiety or depression or OCD because it's not being treated. And then when it is being treated, perhaps some of the issues that they may encounter in a classroom might subside a little bit. So there's possibilities for change within this category and also within the neurological conditions category. Sometimes people who have seizures, who have brain injuries, those things can heal, can get better, can get worse. So there's a little bit of shifting back and forth. But when we're talking about neurodiverse students, this is really a pretty broad group of students, right? This is a lot of different things going on. So I wanted us to focus in on a couple. At UK, I would say, and I tried to get a hold of somebody at the DRC to get the numbers. I don't have the numbers, but I know we've talked about this before. So you're going to have most of your students with accommodations are going to be related probably to ADHD, possibly to mental and ill health, maybe to autism. So these are really going to be a little bit more prevalent in our classrooms than possibly some of the other ones. So I wanted to focus in on these two chunks, if you will. So we'll be looking at these. ADHD and autism, and then also this depression, anxiety, and trauma. And we know post-COVID, we have a lot of students who really are continuing to struggle with mental health in a lot of different ways. It was elevated during COVID, and because that was such a long-term process, there was like 2 years, right? And hey, we're still there now. When you have that sustained trauma that we all had together, that's going to compromise your anxiety and your stress for quite a while. So this is something that we're going to continue to see. So it's helpful to know what kinds of challenges neurodiverse students can encounter in the classroom. And I may abbreviate neurodiverse students to NDS. I realize that neurodiverse is one word, but it's a little more clear. So NDS, what challenges are these students facing in the classroom? So most students that have that are neurodivergent are going to struggle with things like time management, organizing things, organizing materials, setting schedules, focusing attention, memory retention, asking for help, regulating emotions, prioritizing tasks, following multi-step directions. So if you've had students in your classroom that are neurodivergent, you may have seen some of these things show up. And so all of those things can be grouped together into something called executive functions. And if you've been in any workshops with me, I'm sure I've talked about executive functions because it's one of my favorite things to talk about. So just to kind of clarify, executive functions, this is part of our brain that's really responsible for different cognitive processes. These are kind of the overarching controls of the brain. And so that would be things like action, monitoring actions, regulating activity. This also has to do with focus. And you can see in the bullet points there, that's things like not only tuning into what someone's doing or talking about or whatever, but also tuning out the distractions around us. Activation, a lot of times people who have executive functioning problems will really struggle with getting started or estimating how long something will take. Emotions is a big one. It's difficult for people who are neurodivergent to manage and regulate their emotions. It's not impossible, of course, but it is a little difficult, and it takes some practice. Memory is difficult, especially working memory with people who are neurodivergent. And then also things like sustaining the speed of your processing, right? Sometimes my processing is very quick, sometimes it is not. So that's just like the fastest overview ever of executive functions. But just know that students who are neurodivergent, people who are neurodivergent, will often struggle with executive functions. Now, I wanted to add on, there are some additional challenges for students with autism, and this doesn't mean that this doesn't apply to other students, because there actually is quite a bit of research that shows that a lot of different people struggle with these things as well. But one thing that students with autism may also encounter is they miss unspoken expectations. Things that we assume that students know or understand is not always the case for people with autism. Interpersonal communication, and I know some of the questions address this that you all posted in the chat box earlier. But it can be very difficult to do things like group work, partners, having class discussions. Critical thinking can also be an issue, and that's kind of intertwined with this idea of big picture thinking. That can be difficult. Some folks with autism will have issues looking at the big picture. They get a little bit focused in on details often. And so that higher level, big picture thinking rather, is kind of difficult. A lot of times they can struggle with unexpected changes in plans. I mean, I don't love it when people change plans on me either, but I can regulate my emotions. And that sometimes is the case for people with autism, but sometimes it is not. Another difficulty is understanding that other people might have different perspectives than you. That's really tricky for students with autism. And so if you've encountered some issues in a classroom setting, especially if it's a discussion that might be kind of a more heated discussion or one where people are expressing their perspective or their point of view, it can be difficult because a student with autism may think that my perspective is the only one and everyone else is clearly wrong. And so that can obviously cause some issues if you are in a setting where you're having a discussion about something that might be a little more controversial or heated. So these are all sweeping generalizations. I want to just make sure that that's very clear. The most useful thing that you can do is to talk openly with your individual student that is in your classroom, if in fact you have someone who does come forward and bring you an accommodations letter, because this is an individual deal. So generally, there are ways that we as instructors can support our neurodivergent students in our classroom. And the good news is, you're not just doing this for your neurodivergent students. All of the things that I'm going to share with you today, every single one, actually there's one maybe that would not necessarily be useful for everybody, but most of them are things that would actually be really helpful for all students. And so my area of specialization, which is universal design for learning, is really a perfect fit for this kind of thing, for teaching students with that are neurodivergent, because it's giving a little bit more information, allowing some choices, but also supporting students when they might need that support. So I'm first going to talk about supporting executive functions. And then after that, I'm going to come back and share some strategies for also supporting students with autism, considering the fact that students with autism also need support with executive functions as well. And honestly, sometimes students with ADHD also need support with other things like social interactions and things like that. So these will all be helpful, I think. So I'm going to go through these quickly all together, and then I'm going to give you some examples, some actual classroom examples that you could use, some strategies for each of these. So we're going to talk a little bit about things you can do on your end to support time management for students, to support organizing information, things you can do to help with memory retention, with self-regulation, with focus and attention, and regulating emotions. And so I've put this at the bottom because a lot of times instructors get a little anxious or worried about, are we holding their hands too much? And so there are ways that you can hold their hands until they've got those skills and then kind of gradually remove that support or scaffolding along the way. And I've got an example there that is linked. So if you are in the slide deck, you're always welcome to click that and go check that resource out if you would like. So that is that. So let's look at time management. One of the most useful things, and we learned this actually during COVID, we did a large study. Some of you may have been a part of that. It was called the TLC study, or Teaching and Learning During COVID. And one of the things that students told us, we surveyed, I think, over 7,000 students, undergraduate students. One of the things that they found to be really helpful during that particular time was when their instructors would send out reminders. And they generally, after reading all of the comments about this, about once a week was really what they were looking for. So you can see some of the quotes here on the right side. She sends out announcements on a regular basis so that we're informed on what's going on for this class. Or another student said, weekly updates on Canvas that display what needs to be done in the near future. So we have to keep in mind that our students are not just taking our class, right? Like they're taking several classes. And so it can be a little tricky to try and meet the schedules and the needs and the deadlines of 4 classes or 3 or however many classes students have. So when we can send out a once a week reminder that just quickly says, hey, just reminding everyone, these things are all due on this day, or these things are due on these days. And also keep in mind, in a couple weeks, this thing will be due. That can be really helpful. We can also use that same reminder to clarify any directions that we may have gotten questions or emails about, and sort of save ourselves a little time in that process. So managing information is a little bit difficult because when students are learning new information, everything that they learn is at the same hierarchy or the same level of importance until someone says, no, this is the big piece. These things kind of fall under that. So one thing that I like to do is be intentional in the use of my slides. And so I will organize my slides as an outline almost. So you can see the 3 different slides on the screen. For all of my heading level 1s, which if we were doing this in an outline format would be the Roman numeral 1, 2, Roman numeral 3, etc. And then I will use different actual visual slides, different colors, to show those different parts of an outline. So let me clarify. So if this is the outline for the things I'm putting in my slide deck, everything that is a major topic I would use to start that off, heading level 1. So they're always going to have a dark purple slide. Then the things that are kind of underneath that, the subheadings. So if this was an outline, again, that would be the A, B, C, etc. I use that slide. And then I use the lightest one, the white with the light purple, as my numbers 1, 2, 3. And so this seems like a little bit of an overkill, but I will say, actually, it helps me to lay out my slides, but it also helps when students are going back and looking over your slides again. It helps to organize that information for them. And it helps to give them a clue as to which things are the most important, which things fall under that. So it helps them organize themselves, the material and the information that they're learning. So those are the examples, and you'll see those used throughout this slide deck. So there they are. And I also like to have a nice clear difference between header slides and content slides, so that when students are looking at, or when I'm looking at a slide deck along the side, I can kind of scroll through there real quickly and see, oh, that looks like that's information, or oh, that's a header for this kind of section. It really helps me with the organization of those things. So memory retention, we can support memory retention by using visuals. I love a graphic organizer. I will make a graphic organizer for anything. I really do, because when we get information through text, also when we get information by hearing it, and then when we get information by seeing it, all of those things together is really supporting our remembering of the things. And that's so helpful. It also can help students understand the hierarchy of the information. Once again, I can see from this particular visual that the thing in the middle has the sub things coming out from there, right? So by laying this out in a graphic organizer and having students fill it in, or even giving them a diagram and showing them the diagram, that visual sticks in our head a lot better than the words will stick in our head. And so when we've got that visual, then we can connect the new pieces that we're learning to that visual. We hold that in our mind, like a mental model, right? So anytime we can do that, use graphic organizers, use diagrams or visuals, we're really aiding in memory retention for our students. Self-regulation. It can be tricky for students who are neurodivergent to sit for long periods of time. And so one way we can do that is by breaking up the passive sitting and listening time with chunks of active activities, learning activities, or active learning strategies. So you can see up here on the top, I've got the before. So let's just say this is a 45-minute long class or whatever. So I've got 2 minutes where I'm doing the introduction as the instructor. Then I'm going to lecture on topic 1 for about 12 or so minutes. Then I'm going to lecture topic 2 for 14 minutes. Then I'm going to lecture topic 3. And then at the end, we'll have about 5 minutes for Q&A. And that's okay. I mean, it'll sort of work. However, if we can break that up a little bit more, then every time we have an active learning thing, so like you can see the first one here at the bottom in pink is a reflection. So we will have just done a quick topic that the instructor's lecturing about, and then we pause. Everybody reflects on, okay, what's one thing that you feel a little confused about from the section we just talked about? So that 1 minute, and now we can share that with our neighbor or share in a small group or whatever. Doing that resets the timer of how long I can sit and listen again. So now we've restarted that timer. So now I can sit and listen for another chunk of time. Then we do something else active, and that resets the timer again. And so now I can sit and listen. So for students who are neurodivergent, breaking up those long periods of sitting and listening, which is kind of passive, even if they're taking notes, it still is a little bit passive. If I can break that up with active pieces, that's going to be really helpful for maintaining focus. Another way to maintain focus and attention is by using learner choice. So there are a lot of ways you can do that. None of them are wrong or right necessarily. We can give students choice in how they get to the end goal. We can give them choice in the tools and methods they use. So for example, I might give students a reading selection and show them how they can download that same reading selection as an MP3 from Canvas, which is something that we have available to us in Canvas. And if you don't know how to do that, send me a message and I will show you how to do that. So that way they have a choice. Do they want to read the thing? Do they want to listen to the thing, right? That choice in the tool. I can use the screen reader to read it to me, or I can read it in a book. We can also give students choices and supports. So maybe they want to use a graphic organizer. Maybe they don't need to. Maybe they're okay with just taking text notes. That's fine. But I can give them that choice. What we don't want to do is only give supports to students that have accommodations, because that obviously singles those students out. When in fact, a lot of those supports would be helpful for many of our students. So if we can just make those available and say, hey, if anybody would find this useful, you can come up here and grab one of these graphic organizers and you can use that if you would like, instead of handing them to the students that we have accommodations letters for. We can also give students a choice in topics, and that will really help with the focus and the attention, because they'll be, if it's something they've chosen and it's a topic they care about, they're going to be a lot more attentive. It's going to retain their attention over longer spans of time. This is one example, and I noticed somebody it's one of our participants today is in my class, so they have seen this example. But one of the things I do in my class is if it's an activity where I can allow them to record their information or record something like a reflection in lots of different ways. Why not? So usually I'll say, hey, you can do that by writing. You can just type it in if you want. You can make an audio recording, which you can do easily in Canvas. You can do a video recording. Again, you can also do that in Canvas, or you can take a picture of something you've drawn. Sounds great. As long as you're conveying the answer or the information, then it doesn't necessarily matter to me which way you do that. And so that really can help students find a way that works best for them, and a way that's really going to show you what they know or what they've learned a lot better. So regulating emotions, again, this is really difficult for people who are, well, some people who are neurodivergent. Speaking for myself, this is very difficult for me. If I get to a place of frustration, it's really hard for me to focus back in on the learning. So one thing I like to try to do is to add these just-in-time resources. I often will add those in Canvas so that students have access to them there as well. And so this, for example, was something where I was having students use a Google slide deck. And I don't want to assume that everyone knows how to use a Google slide deck. Do they? Probably. But are there probably some people that don't? Yeah, maybe. So rather than me getting 47 emails about it, or rather than that student getting frustrated and trying to figure out at the same time how to do the assignment and also how to use Google Slides, I could just build in this video that I just found online already anyway, right? So I just stuck it in there. Here, if you need help with this thing, here it is. It's already ready to go. So those are the pieces that we just sort of talked through: time management, organizing information, memory retention, graphic organizers, self-regulation, focus and attention, and then regulating emotions. So I want to pause for just a second. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'd love to know if you all have anything that you've used that works really well for supporting students who are neurodivergent. Possibly you are neurodivergent yourself, things that work really well for supporting your executive functions. So we'll give just a minute or two if anybody wants to add anything in the chat box. If you're brave enough to unmute in a large group like this, feel free to unmute and share out loud. What are things that help students who are neurodivergent, or yourself possibly, with executive functioning?
Could I pose it as a question? I put a lot of time into kind of mapping things out in a schedule that's pretty detailed that I include in the syllabus, and I, try my best to avoid making changes. But just wonder if you think that that's helpful or overwhelming for students to kind of see something laid out in terms of all the different assignments and deadlines associated with that, if that's helpful or not.
I think it would depend on how it's laid out. Yeah, I think there are some ways that you can lay things out like that it's really helpful, and I think there are some ways you can lay things out that are kind of overwhelming. What you might do, and here's the thing, like, you're never gonna pick the one thing that works for everybody. That's just not how it works. So I might suggest that you maybe have two different options. If they would prefer to have an option that is kind of visually mapped all out like that, that's available, and you could just copy and paste that into a text only option. Or maybe you could even use drop downs or something like that. Like, have a couple different ways maybe that they could access that. And you're going to probably meet a lot more people's needs in that way if you're able to kind of give one or two different options. Let's see what we've got. Create a weekly agenda description in their modules for each week. Yeah, what are we going to be doing for the week? The homework, assignment reminders, class updates. Yeah, great. Thanks, Ashley. Ooh, Jennifer says allowing students to stand as opposed to sit during class. Color coding the deadlines and daily schedule. Oh yeah. Oh, I'd like to see an example of that. That sounds pretty awesome. Color coding is great, but do keep in mind that there are some people who are colorblind. So avoid using reds and greens if you can. Built-in late turn-in for assignments. Yeah, I love that, Catherine. That works really well for some folks. And some people really need a deadline, right? So I think it's kind of an individual student thing. Controlling emotions can be supported by allowing the student to take a break. Yes, literally take a break from the classroom. Yes, and we're going to talk about that here in just a second. Some other ways to do that. Weekly guides posted in a Canvas module. Help them and me. Yes, Heather, same. Yeah, a lot of the things that I try to put together, I honestly put them together for myself first, and then end up using them with my students because a lot of times they're actually really helpful. Okay, let's go back to the slides. Keep adding ideas though if you have some. I love to see what people are doing. So I wanted to share a few additional supports for students with autism spectrum disorder. And some of these will also apply to all students who are neurodivergent. So we're going to look at a couple different pieces here. We're going to look at things like missing unspoken expectations, interpersonal communication, how we can support that, big picture thinking, and then unexpected changes. When a change occurs, that can sometimes cause some real issues for students, especially students with autism. And then addressing inappropriate behavior. How do we do that with a student maybe that is not following classroom norms? And what do we do with that information? How do we treat that? So the first piece is missing these unspoken expectations. So a lot of times, we as instructors assume that our students know what we want from them. And sometimes they do, but sometimes they don't. And so when we're not being super clear, one way that we can help clarify is by providing examples. And so we can provide examples honestly for anything. And so providing an example will of course give them something they can kind of use as a framework for what they're let's say an assignment or an activity. But it also answers a lot of the questions that maybe we forgot to answer. And so that might be things like, what voice are we using? Or how much, like, how long is this thing supposed to be? Is this something that is this really formal? Or is this like we're just having a conversation with each other? It answers a lot of those questions. Examples answer a lot of those questions when maybe we have forgotten. So this is an example of a course I've taught before, which was in college of education. And so we were laying out a lesson plan. And so I was asking students to create a lesson plan. So I created a lesson plan as an example. I was asking students to create a video. So I created a video as an example. And they did not all copy exactly what I did. In fact, most of them were completely different because they were all studying different things and we're talking about different things. And so providing examples doesn't necessarily mean that you're showing them how to do it. What that's doing is it's giving them the answers to a lot of the unspoken expectations that we maybe somehow didn't answer. And of course you can provide, as long as you ask the students ahead of time, you can provide former student examples. So issues that you might have when students are working in groups, so specifically students with autism and really honestly other students who are neurodivergent as well. Group work can be really tricky. One way that I'd like to suggest putting groups together is by allowing people to be in groups based on their strengths or their skills. So in this example, let's say we were doing a large project and I was thinking through this project and I'm thinking, okay, so in order for this group to do this project, we're going to need somebody who can do the writing. We need someone who's going to like organize the group, keep everybody on task, kind of a project manager or organizer, if you will. We're going to need somebody who's going to stand up and do the presenting or this, like the actual public speaking. And then we're going to need someone who's going to put the slides together, who's going to make the handouts, kind of an artist type. And so I'm going to have students, I'm going to explain what each of those roles are. And then I'm going to ask them to go stand in a corner. You can also do this if you're doing it an online course. You can do this with breakout rooms in corners. And you're going to say, all right, if you feel like your strengths are really more of an artist, you're going to stand over here. If you feel like your strengths are really more of like the speaker, the presenter type person, go here. And then you'll have them form those groups by putting one person from each group together. So of course, there's some logistics around this one, right? Like what happens if everybody's in one thing and then there's no one in the other three? And there are ways to think through that. So I've added a link up here at the top that will take you to kind of a one-pager, although I think this one's more than one page. That walks you through this process, how you might use something like this in your classroom. Because a lot of the issues that come up in group work have to do with people not knowing what their roles are, not knowing what's expected of them, and also sometimes they feel like they're doing something that they're just not super great at. So when we can put them into a group already feeling like they've got some skills in that thing, and they know what they're doing, they know what their role is, that will eliminate a lot of the issues that we have when we're working with neurodiverse students in small groups. Another way to think about this is of course, group work is the thing we want to do at the university level. It's as important, and it's important for going out into the field. However, is group work right for this particular thing that I'm getting ready to do? And if it is it possible that I could maybe offer some options? Do they have to work in humongous groups? Like, could a partner be a group? Could I give people the option to either, if you want to work with a partner, you can. If you want to work in a small group of 3 or 4, that's fine. And if that makes you panic, then you're welcome to just work by yourself. That's okay too. Is this the kind of activity that you can offer those options for? Another option, especially if it's a student that's really having difficulty working at all in a group, you can also give them the option to work maybe with you. Come to office hours and you will be their partner, or the TA could be their partner. Often students who are students with autism work better with adults because they know what the role is with an adult. Like, and by adults, you know what I mean, like professor or whatever. They know what the role is. They know kind of how the power dynamic works there. But when it's their peers, that's the part that's really difficult. So sometimes having them work with you will still get the same work across. Like, they'll still be doing the same things that they would be with their peers, but because they're in a place where they know the roles of each individual and how those kind of work together, that removes a lot of those barriers for students with autism. Another thing to think about is this idea of big picture thinking being kind of tricky. So one way that you can help with that is by using visuals. A thing that is really helpful to remember generally when working with students with autism spectrum disorder, visuals, visuals, visuals. The more you can lay things out visually for them, then they're just going to be quicker to grasp onto that concept. So let's say you are in a course studying ancient Greece, for example, and this particular student that you're working with maybe has a little bit of an obsession with Greek mythology. So although the course is about lots of things, not just Greek mythology, it might be hard for that student to get off of that mind track of mythology, mythology, mythology. And so it can be helpful to visually lay out. So here are all the things we're going to be studying in our course. Yeah, we're definitely going to be talking about mythology, but we're also going to be talking about individuals, people, the culture and society as a whole, art and architecture, etc. And so when I can lay it out like this is really cueing students visually to say, yes, that's an important part, but that's not the only part. Another way to do this is to sort of lay out the course visually. So this was from a statistics course actually that I took. Yikes. And at the beginning of the course, we kind of just jumped right into one of these things, maybe an independent t-test or something. I can't remember what we started with. And then we jumped around to something else where we were doing like a chi-square, and then we moved to something else. And like, I didn't really feel like I had an understanding of what sort of the whole picture was for this course. And then like in the last couple of weeks, the instructor shared a visual similar to this, like a flow chart that showed like where all these things go, like how they all make sense together. And like, this was a game changer for me because I was like, oh, if I would have had this at the beginning, like I would have totally seen where we were going with this, and I would have understood where each thing was and what we might, what we might be doing next, what things were left over to still work on. So having it in a visual format like this can be really, really helpful. And I mean, this is still words, right? It's not just, these are not pictures, like these are words, but being laid out in a visual format like it is in a flow chart or something can be really helpful. So unexpected changes. So students with really, honestly, all neurodivergent students don't love unexpected changes. When I taught at the school with for students with specific learning disabilities, I would come home and say something to my husband like, oh, we had a fire drill in second period. And he's like, uh-huh. And I was like, well, the whole day was shot after that, like, clearly, because that change that they weren't expecting, they were just completely like, that was, you may as well have just gone home at that point, because everyone was so shook up and like things changed, and it was very difficult for them to get themselves back into a place of learning. So when we can make sure that we're letting students know about any changes that may be coming up, that's really helpful. We can also make sure that we're being very consistent. So if your course is one where you can have a similar structure from week to week, so maybe we'll start out with announcements, then I might do a lecture for a little bit of time, then we're going to do a thing where we're going to talk to a partner, and then we're going to do a little bit more lecture, and then at the end we might do a quiz game or something. I don't know. There may be a format that would make sense, but that could be a similar format from week to week or from class meeting to class meeting. That will really reduce a lot of anxiety for students who are neurodivergent, specifically students with autism, because they kind of know what to expect next. And then the other thing that you can do, I mean, things are going to change. Like this happens a lot, right? Sometimes something happens, there's a water main break, and you have to have a class in another place. If it's possible to give all students, I wouldn't just only email one student, but to give all students ample warning. Hey, just letting everybody know there has been a water main break. There's a possibility that we may need to meet in another place. I will continue to give you information as I know. Like giving them that warning is going to allow them to start like, okay, there's going to be a change. Like they can start to regulate their emotions a little bit better around those unexpected changes the further ahead they know. So addressing inappropriate behavior in class. Especially with students, some students with autism spectrum disorder will have some difficulties when it comes to doing things like having group discussions. Sometimes they may blurt things out like while you're talking, or there could be a lot of different ways that this might come across in a classroom setting. It's very rarely intentional, but it still is a little disruptive, right? So there are some things that we can do on our end. One, I would say probably the best thing to do first is to contact the DRC consultant, the Disability Resource Center consultant. There should be a name of a person on that student's accommodation letter. So that's always your first go-to. This just happened in class. Do you have any ideas? You know, but because they've all worked individually with these students and met with them and talked with them about what worked well for them. So they really have established some good contact and information with these individual students. So that's always the first place to go, first contact to make. Another way to do this is in a one-on-one setting, it's very important that it's very important that we don't have this conversation in front of a class of 200 people, right? I mean, nobody wants that to happen. Like no one would want that. So you could have that student come to office hours. You could make an appointment with that student to come meet you some other time. You could talk to them after class by themselves, however you need to do that, but please make sure it's in a one-on-one setting. And it's helpful if you use very direct statements. So here is an example. I might say something like, it's not appropriate for college students to interrupt their professor or their classmates when they're talking. Now, we know that, like most people, we understand that's how that works, but not necessarily if you're a student with autism spectrum disorder. You may not. So if we can say that just directly, it's not appropriate for college students to interrupt their professor or their classmates when they're talking. When do you think might be a more appropriate time to share your ideas? And then have that conversation with the students. I would do that definitely in a one-on-one setting. Another thing that you can do if this is an issue that has happened once, you've had a conversation with the student, it can be helpful to make a plan with that student. So let's say a student is just really having difficulty not shouting things out in the middle of class. Is there something that you can do, like some kind of like secret code that you could have between the student and not an actual secret code, but between the student and yourself, so that if that student is just like crawling out of their skin wanting to share a thing, they've got some way to convey that to you that's not shouting out that thing. So one way you can do that is by using something called visual cueing. You can have a Post-it note system. So maybe give that student 3 different colored Post-it notes. Red, green, and yellow would be good. And so if the student is really, there's something that they want to talk about or whatever, they might put up the green Post-it and they can stick it on their laptop, on the front of their laptop, or they can put it at the front of their desk if this is in a physical setting. If this is an online setting, they can very easily, and you can show them how to message you individually in the chat box. And then if they're kind of getting to a place where they're getting anxious and like, this is not going to end well, they can change that to the yellow. And that way you have a visual understanding. You can also do that with something like emojis. Some kind of a visual is really helpful. Hand signals is sometimes helpful. They can appropriate hand signals. Then they can show you that like, I'm getting to a place where I'm a little elevated and I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to do next. you want to know that before it gets to the point of no return, right? Because once a student, especially a student with autism, gets to the point where they're like they've already raised their anxiety level and they're elevated, it's very difficult to get them to step back from that, right? It's very difficult. So the goal is to not get to that point, right? To have some other means of letting you know that they're getting to that point. So those are some of the things that were just specifically for students with autism, but you can look at some of these things like the interpersonal communication, the skill-based grouping, that would be really helpful for a lot of students. The visual concept maps, that would be helpful for a lot of students, not just students with autism, not just students who are neurodivergent, but a lot of students. And so really the end goal here is, are there things that you can build in that will remove barriers for students that are neurodivergent, but will also be really helpful to other students in the class? The answer is yes, there are probably things that you can do. And in fact, the entire framework of universal design for learning, which you see probably over my shoulder here, that's what it's designed for. It's designed to help you figure out what are the barriers that students might encounter in my class, and what are the things I can proactively do to remove those barriers. So those are the ones that we went through. We do have a little bit of time left. I wanted to share with you my new favorite tool of all time that's really helpful. It's called Goblin Tools. There's a web version. There's also an app version. And this is an AI deal. And so I'm going to actually take you out to that tool so you can see what it does. Okay. So let's say that I am a person who's not super great with executive function, which is true. And I've got something that I've got to do, like it's a thing I got to plan. So let's say I've got a party coming up. So I'm going to say plan a birthday party. And like, I understand that that's a thing I need to do, but that sounds like a really big thing. And like, I can't possibly know where to start or what to do first or how many different things or how long this is going to take. So I can use this particular thing, this part of the tool, which is the magic to-do list. And I put in one thing I want to do. And then I can click this little breakdown item here. And it's going to take just 1 second, but it will literally break down planning a birthday party into step-by-step with little check boxes. So this can be really helpful in a lot of situations. So here we go. Okay, maybe first I want to decide on a date for the party and a time for the party. Then I'm going to create it. So if I'm actually doing these things, I can go in and be like, okay, check, I did that. All right, next. All right, now I'm going to create a guest list. So you can probably imagine the various settings where this would be really helpful. Here's one I did earlier, studying for a test. All right, first you need to get the study material. Check. And I know this seems silly, but sometimes for people who are neurodivergent, like going from studying for a test to like these little individual items is really hard. And that takes all of my cognitive energy. So when I get to the place where I'm actually doing the studying, I'm already shot at that point. Like my attention is shot, I'm exhausted, I'm frustrated, and that's not what we want. So when I can use things like this, tools like this to help, that's really awesome. A couple other things that I think are pretty awesome here. This formalizer, so you can take the things that you want to say. And this is a fun tool to try out. I'm going to say, that was in the last email I sent you. Okay, so that's like something that I'm trying to be snarky about. Like that was in the last email I sent you. And so what this will do is we'll take what I really want to say and it will put it into nice words. It's like, what's his name? Oh, the anger translator for Obama, but in reverse. So it takes the spicy things I want to say and makes them into nicer things. I apologize, but I believe the information was included in the previous email I sent you. Another part of this is the judge. Am I misreading the tone of this? So if someone has sent you a message and you're not really sure how to process that, you can put that here and it will tell you, or rather, if you want to send a message to someone, I'm sorry, you will type in what you want to say, and then it will say, this is how your text has come across. This one also can give you the estimator, can help you estimate how long a thing will take. And again, this is all using AI to do these things. There's a compiler where you can kind of brain dump everything, and then it will put it into a nice list for you that makes sense. So it'll help you prioritize maybe what you should do first, what you should do next. And then Chef, this one is also just kind of funsies. Like all right, what food do I have in my cabinet and fridge right now? And is there a thing I can make with that? So these tools, some of them are a little, they're not as like game changers necessarily, but some of these really are. So if you've got students that are really struggling, maybe show them this tool. There's an app that's useful as well. It's the same product, but in an app version. So that is Goblin Tools, and I did want to share that because it's a game changer for some things, for sure. So we've got a little less than 10 minutes left. So I wanted to pause, and I'd love to hear, what are your takeaways? What questions do you still have? What are some resources that you might still need? So let's pause for a couple minutes and see what we've got. You're welcome to unmute and share out loud as well. Some really great stuff in the chat box. Y'all save the chat whenever you get out of the meeting. It's really good. I'm going to stop recording now. That way, if anybody wants to share anything that they do not want to be instead recording,